Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Good to see you. Glad you're here. Are you ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
Turn to Joshua 1. Joshua 1 verse 8. This book of the law. What's the Hebrew word there? Torah. This book of Torah shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate therein day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall have good success. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 12 and 13. In this chapter 12 and chapter 13, this will help me share with you kind of what I was going through last weekend. Yes, look in verse 27. Now you are the body of Messiah, and members in particular, and Yahweh has set some in the assembly, first apostles, secondarily prophets, thirdly teachers, after that miracles, then gifts of healings, helps, governments, diversities of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Are all workers of miracles? And what's the answer to those questions? No. No. Answer is absolutely no. Have all the gifts of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? No. But covet earnestly the best gifts, and yet I show unto you a more excellent way. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, it says in King James, Greek word agape, means love. If I have not love, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, and have not love, I am nothing. Well, I do not understand all mysteries. I do not have all knowledge. I do not have all faith. But I do love you. And I do love Yahweh. And I do love His Son, our Messiah. And that love I have for you and for Him and for them is why I had this gnawing on the inside of me last week. I am never hesitant nor apologetic about preaching truth. Right. I'm not going to apologize for it, and I'm not going to hesitate when I've got to preach it. I cannot be. I must not be. Right? But when it comes to speaking about the Apocrypha, I cannot and must not take the same hardline stance concerning it as I do concerning Torah. Right. On the inside, I knew, I understood that I need to say more about that subject today. That's what was gnawing at me last week, and didn't even know it, because I thought today we'd just go right on into Genesis 6. But once I saw that sign, once I began to put it together, I realized that no, I need to sum up and make sure we're all on the same page concerning the things I have had to say and I'm about to say about the Apocrypha. Last week's message was this: we should read the Apocrypha. This week's message is we should read the Apocrypha. But there are some buts, and we need to go over those together. So, but number one, we should read the Apocrypha, but there is nothing more important for us to read than Torah. Right. Nothing. If you've got 10 minutes to read Torah instead of Apocrypha. If you've just got a set amount of time to study Torah instead of the Apocrypha. Well, what about the Gospels? Well, the Gospels have no true meaning if you do not know and understand and have not read Torah. Right. There's nothing, and I'm going to stand by that, there's nothing more important to read than Torah. I'm not devaluing any other books of the Bible when I say that. But the fact is, and it's a fact that must be known, there is nothing that we can read that's more important than reading Torah. Yahweh said to Joshua, this book, right. This book of Torah, which means what? Instruction. This book of my instruction shall not depart out of your mouth, right. But you shall meditate therein. how often?
Day and night.
Day and night. Do not let it depart out of your mouth, and do not let it depart out of your thinking. That's what Yahweh said. And though I said that we should read the Apocrypha, don't misunderstand me. I am not saying read it instead of.
Right.
And I'm not saying read it because it's just as important as.
Right.
All right? There's nothing more important to read than Torah. Psalm 119:11 says it's Torah that we have to hide in our hearts so that we don't sin against Yahweh.
Amen.
Verse 30 said it is Torah that is the way of truth. Verse 55 says it is Torah that reveals to us our Creator and His name. Verse 105 says Torah is the lamp unto our feet and the light unto our path. Verse 127 says Torah is more valuable than the finest gold that you could find. Verse 130 says that the entrance of Torah gives light and brings understanding. Verse 140 says Torah is pure. Well, you know what that means? There's nothing more important that we can read than Torah.
Amen.
Yahweh spoke it to Moses, not in a dream,
Right.
not in a vision,
Right.
but how did He speak it to him?
Face to face.
He said, I spoke it to him face to face as what?
A friend.
As a man would speak to his friend. Now that's as intimate as you can get.
Right.
And Yahweh said, this is the way I delivered it to Moses. And Moses wrote it down. It becomes, for me, it becomes the litmus test for all true faith. There is no true faith without it being grounded in Torah.
Amen.
The Messiah said himself in John chapter 5, but if you believe not his writings, speaking of Moses, how shall you believe my words? If you do not believe the writings of Moses, how shall you believe what I say?
Right.
In verse 46, the verse before that, he said this, if you had believed Moses, you would have believed me because he wrote of me.
Right.
In the verse before that, he said, do not think I will accuse you before the Father. There is one who will accuse you, Moses. Moses will be the prosecuting attorney to all who have either no faith or who have a pseudo faith. Moses will stand before the Father and accuse them if they have no faith or if they have a fake faith, a pseudo faith. A pseudo faith is a faith that claims to believe the writings of Moses but does not accept Yeshua as the Messiah. Mm-hmm. That's a fake faith. That's impossible. You can't believe the writings of Moses and not believe that Yeshua is the Messiah. Right. So that makes any faith that says, yeah, I serve Yahweh, I keep Torah. Is Yeshua your Messiah? No. Well, then you don't keep Torah.
Right.
Right? But also a pseudo-faith is a faith that claims to believe in the Messiah but does not keep Torah.
Right. Amen. Right.
That's a pseudo-faith.
Right.
Both of those are fake. Both of those, it's impossible for them to be real. If you claim to follow Torah but do not accept Yeshua, that's fake faith. If you claim to follow the Messiah but do not keep Torah, your faith is not a valid faith. And Moses will be the prosecutor who accuses you of having an invalid faith before the Father in the day of judgment. That's what Messiah said in John chapter 5. Well, these things make Torah the most important thing that any of us can ever read.
Right.
So, but number one, we should read the Apocrypha, but there's nothing more important to read than Torah. But number two, we should read the Apocrypha, but not for doctrine. The Greek word for doctrine is didaskalia. Did pretty good there till I choked up. Didaskalia. Didaskalia in Greek means instruction. There's a Hebrew word for instruction. What is that word?
Torah.
Torah. See, we read Torah for our didaskalia.
Yeah.
We read Torah to get our instruction. Torah is instruction. So when the Greek take the word, or the King James Version, or most versions, when they take the word didaskalia, and they translate it as doctrine. That's the way it's mostly translated. It's instruction that becomes our doctrine. Well, the instruction that is supposed to be our doctrine is Torah.
Right.
Because that's what Yahweh said. That's what He spoke. So when we're formulating doctrine, it has to be based on what Yahweh said in Torah. If it disagrees with what Yahweh said in Torah, it's a doctrine of men or a doctrine of demons.
Right.
Are you with me?
Right.
You can have instruction that comes from men, and you can have instruction that comes from demons. None of those are to be followed. It's the instruction that comes from Yahweh that is to be followed. So we read Torah for our doctrine. We read Torah for our instruction that came from Yahweh. Torah is our doctrine. If you are reading any Apocrypha writing and it seems to add to Torah, or to diminish aught from Torah, or if it seems to contradict Torah, that is to be rejected and Torah is to be followed. But that's not just true of the Apocrypha. That's what I don't understand, is why people want to put the Apocrypha to some test that they're not willing to put other things to the test concerning. True, if the Apocrypha says something that adds to, takes away, or contradicts Torah, we hold to Torah.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we throw the whole Apocrypha away because of that.
Right.
Are you with me?
Yes, sir.
If we held everything to that test, we wouldn't read anything.
Right.
Or watch anything, or listen to anything.
Right.
Right. All right. That's why I know that anybody who thinks Paul taught that the law passed away and that the Gentiles do not have to keep the law, that's how I know that they're in grave error. I know that they've either misread Paul or they misunderstood Paul's writings, because any true teacher or prophet or apostle, everything he says agrees with Torah.
Right.
Right?
That's true.
If it disagrees with Torah, we go back to Torah.
Right.
You got a preacher standing up saying something that contradicts Torah, who are you going to believe? You're supposed to believe Torah.
Right.
You got a Sunday school quarterly that teaching you something that can't be backed up by Torah, who you're going to believe?
Torah.
You believe Torah. So the Torah makes it clear that anybody that contradicts Torah, they're false. They're a false teacher, false prophet, false pastor, false evangelist, false apostle, whatever you want to call them. They're false. Right? So anybody who thinks the Apostle Paul is teaching that Gentiles don't have to keep the law, I know they've misread what Paul wrote, or they misunderstood it gravely, because if Paul is saying that, he's a false prophet or a false apostle, false teacher.
Right.
Yep. Yes.
Right? So people have one of two choices. Either they have to say, okay, Torah's where I get my doctrine from, and I thought Paul said I don't have to keep some of the things written in Torah, so I must have misunderstood him. They've got that choice. Or choice number two is to say, Paul is a false apostle. I'm not going to believe anything he said.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just two choices.
People keep trying to go for choice number three. There isn't a choice number three. Right? You cannot add to nor take aught from Torah and stay in truth. When it comes to reading the Apocrypha, I have found a few areas. I'm new to it. I've found a few areas of concern, but not many. Not a lot, but I have found a few. For instance, in the book of Jubilees, you will find far more restrictions concerning the Sabbath than you will in Torah. The book of Jubilees puts a lot of restrictions on man as to what he can and can't do on the Sabbath. He cannot have marital relations with his spouse on the Sabbath according to Jubilees. He can't drink something unless he prepared it the day before. If he didn't get it ready the day before, then he can't have anything to drink. He can't fight in combat on the Sabbath. Now this lets you know how popular the book of Jubilees was, because that's the only place that you're going to find that restriction. And during the Maccabean revolt,
Right.
thousands of them were killed. And why were they killed?
They wouldn't fight on.
They wouldn't fight on the Sabbath. And Mattathias finally stood up to the people and said, listen, our enemy knows that we won't fight on the Sabbath. And either we start fighting on the Sabbath or they will annihilate us.
Right.
Well, he was in the right, because there is no Torah restriction against doing that.
Right.
But there was something written in Jubilees that said that you shouldn't do that. Well, if there's a discrepancy between what was written in Jubilees and what was written in Torah, which do you follow?
Torah.
You follow Torah. And if you go read the book of Jubilees, it reads different. We went over this some last week. It reads different than what's written in Torah. In Torah, you got a first-hand account of Moses saying, "Thus saith Yahweh." This is what he said to me, and I'm telling you what he said. But when you read the book of Jubilees, it doesn't come across that way. It is a second or third or fourth-hand account, and they're saying this was said, and then they're adding a little bit to it.
Yeah.
Were they wrong? Absolutely they're wrong. You shall not add to nor diminish aught from. It's just as wrong to add to it as it is to diminish aught from. But most of the time, what I've found so far, most of the time, their guilt lies in being overly zealous.
Yeah.
I can handle being overly zealous a lot better than I can being out and out deceitful.
Yeah.
They're not, if the book of Jubilees was written and it said, yeah, Yahweh said you should keep the Sabbath, but we're telling you that you shouldn't keep the Sabbath, then throw the book of Jubilees out.
Right. Right.
Okay. There's a lot of people who would be well to get rid of their doctrinal books, because their doctrinal books, that's what they're telling them. You don't have to keep Sabbath anymore. That passed away. Well, that's the book you ought to toss,
Right.
not the book of Jubilees.
Right.
Are you
Yes.
Did you get that?
Yep.
There are people who won't read the Apocrypha, but who are reading the doctrinal statements of their denomination that are telling them you don't have to keep the Sabbath anymore. That's the book you ought to throw away.
Right.
Not the book of Jubilees.
Yes.
Their issue sometimes was being overzealous. What it reminds me of is Eve, not Eve, Kavah. Isn't it amazing how years of indoctrination. The serpent came to Kavah and said, has Yahweh said unto you, you shall not eat of every tree in the garden? What did she say?
You shouldn't even touch it.
She said, she got overzealous, didn't she?
She did.
Well, no. He said we could eat of every tree except the one in the midst of the garden. Now, he told us not to even touch that one.
Yeah.
She got overzealous.
Right.
Did Yahweh say that?
No.
No. Did she add to what Yahweh said?
She did.
Yeah. Should we cut her name out of the Bible and throw it away?
No, sir.
Right. So that same line of reasoning there's no reason to throw Jubilees out either.
Right.
If there's a contradiction, if you see a difference, no problem. Our standard is Torah.
Right.
That's where we get our doctrine. We should read the Apocrypha, but number 2, we should not read it for doctrine. Doctrine is instruction. Instruction is Torah. Torah is our doctrine. When the Sadducees or Pharisees would ask Messiah a question about faith or doctrine, he would oftentimes say to them, well, what did Moses say? Right? They bring up a question to him, what did he say? Well, what did Moses say? Or he'd say something like this, well, it is written.
It is written.
What's he referring to? Well, he's referring to what Moses said. So our doctrine comes from Torah. But number 3, we should read the Apocrypha, but understand not all Apocrypha is equal. I don't think that the Apocrypha books should have been removed. That's where I'm at. I don't think they should have been removed. I do not think they should be treated as if they're dangerous or that it is somehow wrong for us to read them, study them, or use them. most of the time, the people who are telling us that we don't need to read them are the same people telling us that we don't need to know anything about the feast of Yahweh.
Right.
Many of the same people who see the Apocrypha as dangerous and to be avoided also see the feast of Yahweh as dangerous and to be avoided.
Right.
Therefore, I don't want them making decisions for me.
Right. Right.
I don't take them at their word when they say, oh, you don't need to read that. Because that's the same thing they told me about the feast.
Yeah.
Had I listened to them, I would not have known to keep the Sabbath. Had I listened to them, I would not have known of the immeasurable beauty and power of Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Shavuot, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. I would not have known of their beauty, their power, and how they speak of my Messiah had I listened to the people who said, you don't need to know that. And they're the same people who have been saying, you don't need to read the Apocrypha. Right. So I don't trust them. Had I listened to them, I would not have known to shun the feast of the beast. They celebrate the feast of the beast. I'm going to choose the feast of Yahweh. Right. Had I listened to them, I would not have known of the power of the dietary laws.
Right.
Because, you don't need to know anything about that. So when these people tell me that the Apocrypha is to be shunned or avoided, I've learned to not trust their motives. Right. But at the same time, I also admit, as I begin reading these writings, I'm not sure that all of them should be treated equally. As I said last week, through the ages, some were included in a universal Deuterocanon, a second canon. I think there were 7 of them that were included. First Maccabees, Second Maccabees, Baruch. Some of them were included in a universal Deuterocanon. But the Eastern Orthodox Deuterocanon said, well, we think there is 4 others we ought to add into this canon. So everybody agreed on 7. Some said, no, we really need 11. And then the Ethiopian Orthodox Deuterocanon added 3 more. And then Jasher, which I quoted from a lot last week, got added in a whole different category by itself. So I can see why some of the books are embraced more readily than others. That's all I'm saying. I can see that. But that does not say to me that any of them ought to be tossed out. That says, yes, I can put more stock in this one, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. I can put more stock in it than I can in the book of Jasher. But I'm not going to throw Jasher out because I'm not as confident in it as I am in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Yes, I can see where the book of Enoch makes so many things plain and clear concerning Genesis, and I can put more confidence in it than I might be in another book. But be that as it may, I'm not going to throw the other book out. Right? If they do not teach doctrine that denies Torah, then I do not see them as something that needs to be avoided. Even if they may not have a lot of value in one area, they have value in another. I want to illustrate that to you this morning in closing by reading a short passage to you out of the book of Jasher, which I quoted a lot last week, or referred to. I didn't necessarily quote it, but I referred to it. Let me say this before I read it. Last week I referred to several things out of the book of Jasher. How long it took Noah to build the ark. Why Rebekah took Laban's idol. Why Abram was thrown into a burning fiery furnace. I find these writings to be intriguing, but I would never use them for doctrine. Are you with me? I would not make how long it took Noah to build the ark a doctrine. I find it intriguing that we have a writing that said he did it in 5 years. I find it intriguing that we have a writing that says why Abraham was thrown into a burning fiery furnace. The purpose of these writings is not to establish doctrine. They're not to be used to teach a truth as if they were the same as Torah. That's not where their value lies, but that doesn't mean they don't have value. So, I want you to listen to this story as I read it, and I want you to tell me whether it has value or not. I'm reading in Jasher, chapter 21. In verse 15, Sarah has said to Abram, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son. I want Hagar and Ishmael gone." I want to pick up reading after he was told that. "And Abraham hearkened to the voice of Sarah, and he rose up early in the morning, and he took 12 loaves and a bottle of water, which he gave to Hagar, and sent her away with her son. And Hagar went with her son to the wilderness, and they dwelt in the wilderness of Paran with the inhabitants of the wilderness. And Ishmael was an archer, and he dwelt in the wilderness a long time. And he and his mother afterward went to the land of Egypt, and they dwelt there. And Hagar took a wife for her son from Egypt, and her name was Meribah. And the wife of Ishmael conceived and bare 4 sons and 2 daughters. And Ishmael and his mother and his wife and children afterward went and returned to the wilderness. And they made themselves tents in the wilderness in which they dwelt. And they continued to travel and then to rest monthly and yearly. And Yahweh gave Ishmael flocks and herds and tents on account of Abraham his father, and the man increased in cattle. And Ishmael dwelt in deserts and in tents, traveling and resting for a long time. And he did not see the face of his father. And in some time after, Abraham said to Sarah his wife, I will go and see my son Ishmael, for I have a desire to see him, for I have not seen him for a long time. And Abraham rode upon his camels to the wilderness to seek his son Ishmael, for he heard that he was dwelling in a tent in the wilderness with all belonging to him. And Abraham went to the wilderness, and he reached the tent of Ishmael about noon. That's a long ride on a camel. And he asked after Ishmael, and he found the wife of Ishmael sitting in the tent with her children. And Ishmael, her husband, and his mother were not with them. And Abraham asked the wife of Ishmael, saying, Where has Ishmael gone? And she said, He is gone to the field to hunt. And Abraham was still mounted upon the camel, for he would not get off the ground, as he had sworn to his wife Sarah that he would not get off from the camel. And Abraham said to Ishmael's wife, My daughter, give me a little water that I may drink, for I am fatigued from my journey. And Ishmael's wife answered and said to Abraham, We have neither water nor bread. And she continued sitting in the tent and did not notice Abraham. Neither did she ask him who he was. But she was beating her children in the tent. And she was cursing them. And she also cursed her husband Ishmael and reproached him. And Abraham heard the words of Ishmael's wife to her children, and he was very angry and displeased. And Abraham called to the woman to come out to him from the tent, and the woman came and stood opposite to Abraham. For Abraham was still mounted upon his camel. And Abraham said to Ishmael's wife, When your husband Ishmael returns home, say to him that a very old man from the land of the Philistines came here to seek you. And thus was his appearance and figure. Describe me to him, please, in other words. I did not ask him who he was, and seeing you were not here, he spoke unto me, and this is what he said. When Ishmael your husband returns, tell him thus did this man say. When you come home, put away this nail of the tent which you have placed here, and place another nail in its stead. Abraham finished his instructions to the woman, and he turned and went off on the camel homeward. And after that, Ishmael came home from the chase, he and his mother, and returned to the tent. And his wife spoke these words to him. A very old man from the land of the Philistines came to seek you, and thus was his appearance and figure. I did not ask him who he was, and seeing you were not at home, he said to me, when your husband comes home, tell him, thus saith the old man, put away the nail of the tent which you have placed here, and place another nail in its stead. And Ishmael heard the words of his wife, and he knew that it was his father, and that his wife did not honor him. Yeah. And Ishmael understood his father's words that he had spoken to his wife. And Ishmael hearkened to the voice of his father. And Ishmael cast off that woman, and she went away. Yeah. Now, anything in particular stand out to you about that story? Does it have any value?
Oh, yeah.
Where would you see any value in it? Anything in particular?
Yeah, she didn't honor the visitor.
She didn't honor visitor. There's one thing we could learn from it.
Choose more wisely who you marry.
And Ishmael remembered his father's wisdom.
He honored his father.
Wasn't angry at him.
Wasn't angry. They had actually, according to the book of Jasher, they had a good relationship. He honored his father. He did. Can I tell you what line jumped out at me when I read it? No doubt he left at dawn just before. He rides a camel all the way till noon. When he arrives, we're told, he would not get off the camel.
Yeah.
Why would he not get off the camel?
He swore his wife instead of the Yahweh.
He would not get off the camel because he promised Sarah that he wouldn't. Now, it doesn't say that Sarah made him promise. Doesn't say she put that demand on him.
Right.
It just said that he had promised her. Honey, I miss Ishmael. I need to go check on him. And sweetheart, I know there may be things in your heart and mind that might trouble you. I promise you, it's Ishmael I'm going to see. I won't even get off my camel while I'm there. But I need to go see him. And when I read that and saw that picture coming to light, I understood what Peter was talking about when Peter said, wives, submit yourself to your husband, even as Sarah, who called Abraham Lord, or Sir, or Mister.
Right.
I mean, she honored him. He was the big man on campus. Yeah. And when he went out among people, they treated him with respect and with honor. And when Sarah was with him, she treated him with the same respect and the same honor as everybody else did. She called him Sir and she called him Mister. But how many of us would go that extra step that Abraham went? Yeah. To show the honor to her that he showed to her.
Right.
Sweetheart, I got to go check on my son. And it's going to take me all day. But I promise you, I love you so much. I promise you, I won't get off my camel. I just need to check on that boy. Now, do we want to throw that out?
No. No.
Of course we don't. I'm thankful for the narratives I've found in the book of Jasher. I'm thankful for the book of 1st and 2nd Maccabees and how that those books have enriched my life and emboldened my faith. I'm thankful for the understanding that has come to me about the book of Genesis through the book of Enoch. We should read the Apocrypha. I am convinced that we should. But as we do, I admit and even admonish that we should also remember there's nothing greater to read than Torah. Our doctrine only comes from Torah, and not all apocryphal writings are equal. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. As I put his name upon you, so shall he himself bless you.